Hey everybody, welcome to Section 2, Unit 1, Chris Epling. So if you're hearing that music in the background, that's what we covered, that's the intro. Now, if you haven't noticed by now, each one of these units where we record and show you the steps of podcasting is actually set up similar to what a podcast will sound like. So there's going to be transitions in this section. We're adding transitions. The first section, of course, had the intro music and the outro music. So I hope you're catching on to this and kind of getting an idea of how it works. Now, this is an exciting section because we're going to be talking about ways to record, proper ways to record sound, how to get a good quality recording, how to set up your equipment options you have available to you on a budget. Be surprised, actually, about what all's out there that you can actually use that is right there at your fingertips. You won't even probably have to do very much to get a good sound, but there's a lot to cover in this section and in this unit. The way I've thought about setting this up, and the music kind of can tell you it's a little bit of an industrial feel to it because we are talking about equipment. This is the down and dirty of podcasting. This is where everything comes together. You can't conduct or put together a podcast if you can't record sound. So let's start by first talking a little bit about the different types of ways that you actually set up to record. Okay? So if you're recording, now we talked about formats. This is the recap. We talked about formats. We talked about genres, themes. I've asked you now to write a 20-word statement kind of summing up your podcast, what it is. If you have all those elements together, you should be able to name your podcast. So that's something that I want you to do starting out, is naming your podcast. So let's talk about recording for a bit. Now, usually, whenever you go to record, if it's just yourself, then you're at an advantage. If you're recording, let's say, an interview-based podcast with someone who does not talk into a microphone very often, you may have a few issues, okay? Nothing big. But someone's not familiar with how the equipment works, then, you have a lot more to deal with. If you're working a multi-host show, then each one of you are responsible for saying, hey, my sound sounds funny. I'm not really getting a good connection. This isn't working, so on and so forth. So let's start out talking a little bit about a solo show. You want to do a test. Okay, so I usually do a brief test recording to make sure everything's connected properly. The recording software is picking up the correct microphone. We will be covering that a little bit later. How to record, recording software, those sorts of things. So now we start out. You want to record your intro. We've all discussed what that is, how that works. So your intro, talking and announcing the episode. You'll describe what's going to be happening in the episode. If you have a guest coming on, you'll talk a little bit about the theme of your podcast for this particular episode. You'll talk a little bit also about maybe perhaps, where you're heading, a recap of the last show. And you welcome everybody. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Now, recording is the next step, of course. So usually I have an outline, and this is really important. If you do not set up an outline, remember I stress planning constantly. Outlines help you. Looking at a sheet of paper and understanding where you're going with a conversation is so important with podcasting. If you sit down just to talk about, hey, how's your dog doing? It's all right. The dog's okay. If you don't have a plan, the conversation can go absolutely anywhere. And it can become dull. And who wants just to listen to two people kind of catching up? It's a tricky thing to sound as if you're doing something off the cuff, that it's not planned. And then, planning, having the show outlined, you know exactly what you want. There is a skill to that. So what I'll do is I'll have my outline. I'll go ahead and go through, the episode. I think a proper episode should run around 30 minutes to 45 minutes. for you, for the students here taking this course. I think we're going to look at maybe around 25-minute podcast, maybe. So I'll wrap it up then and thank the listeners. And, of course, ask people to do things such as subscribe to the show on whatever platform they like listening to podcasts. It could be Stitcher, iTunes. There's a lot of places to listen to podcasting nowadays. Ask them to subscribe and to rate your show. You can give your contact information if anyone has a question. Let's say someone is wanting to reach out to you. They have an idea for maybe a topic to talk about. Those sorts of things. Now, multi-guest shows run similar to that, but you have to think about your equipment. We're going to get into the actual audio recording software, how to set that up so you can record multiple people a little bit later. We're just covering the basics in Unit 1. Let's just get you familiar with the lingo, how things are described in podcasting and recording. So you want to be sure and have all your equipment set up, do a test run, make sure that everything is sound levels are sounding good. You don't want to record, let's say, on a street corner or maybe while your mother's cooking dinner in the kitchen. You want to go to a place that's quiet, that you have not a lot of distractions, that your sound quality is nice and crisp and clean. And this isn't just because you want to sound good and have a podcast that is a quality podcast, but you also want to save yourself a lot of trouble because down the road you're going to have to edit. And editing can be a real bummer when you have a ton of stuff that is just cluttering up your audio file. Mistakes, loud noises in the background, things happening that shouldn't happen, such as bangs, knocks, ticks, things like that. So you don't want that to happen, okay? Now, this is all considered, your pre-production phase. This is just collecting the different tracks that we call them, okay? So if you do one recording, you'll save that. We'll get into that too. Maybe you'll do a second recording. Maybe you're actually going to somewhere to interview someone. And there at your home, you're going to do the intro. But the body of the podcast will take place somewhere else. So there's different types of ways to collecting your audio. And like I said, we'll be covering that more. But the basic first steps in recording is to make sure that you have a plan of action on what you're going to talk about. In the next unit, we're going to be talking about the different styles of equipment, what you have available to you, what you could use, what you could use if you have a ton of money, and all the different types of varieties of ways to collect sound. So this is a short, simple, sweet unit, Unit 1 of Section 2. Let's get familiar with recording and what it means to collect sound in general.